Hello and welcome to another episode of Angel Insights, the show that goes deep into the world of early stage investing. I'm your host, Tom Britton, and welcome to the show. And today I'm delighted to be welcomed by two individuals from Deep Blue Biotech, Tim Corcoran and Manuel Rios. Gents, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
For those that aren't aware of what you do, could you give us a quick summary of what it is you're building at Deep Blue Biotech?
We are developing a cyanobacterial technology for the production of carbon neutral, if not outright carbon negative chemicals, predominantly for the personal care industry.
I'm aware that you're using synthetic biology to produce these chemicals. For us less scientific individuals, could you take us through what synthetic biology is and how you're using it?
I can give it a go. It's basically understanding how organisms work and editing that in a way that can produce something different. So it's literally like coding life in order to create things that they were not before by editing how the organisms work.
And just keeping it with that theme, what is synthetic biology currently being used for the most?
It's got pretty widespread usage, to be honest. It's used in pharma, agriculture, sustainable materials, energy and chemicals. I think increasingly it's seen as a tool for manufacturing, but it has really quite broad capabilities.
And more broadly, what are some of the issues that come into play with synthetic biology?
I think that the key one is always the genetic engineering of whichever microbe it is you're working with. The second thing is usually scaling it up. It's one thing to do it at lab scale. It's another thing to do it at industrial scale.
Are there any moral issues with synthetic biology that people should be aware of?
Well, we've not spotted any. It's possible that we're just amoral. But no, these aren't conscious organisms. We're not creating conscious organisms. You could argue that tampering with nature in any shape or form is risky, but it's all done in a very safe, controlled environment, so it shouldn't impact the wider environment.
Yeah, okay. I would add to that it has been for some time, particularly in food, this controversy around GMOs, genetic modified organisms. But what we're trying to do here is basically leverage their capabilities to produce things. So it's not for consumption. It's just mainly using as mini factories of chemicals. So it's like partnering with nature more than doing things at the fringes of something unethical.
Okay. Now we've got a base of synthetic biology. Let's talk a little bit more about you and what you're doing with Deep Blue Biotech. Can you tell me a little bit about where the idea for the company came from?
Yeah, so Manu and I, we actually met in Cambridge on the Carbon-13 Venture Builder. We'd both joined looking for environmental related technologies. I had previously worked with another precision fermentation, synthetic biology company, and so I was looking for similar technologies so I could leverage what I already knew. Manu came at it from a slightly different angle. I don't know, Manu.
Yeah, I have a bit of a journey. My background is technical. I'm a chemical engineer, and then I did a master's in environmental engineering. But then my career, I worked 20 years in corporate, Unilever mainly, working on product design, innovation, brand development, more commercial stuff. And I went full circle up to leading the function of sustainable design with Unilever. Main task there was to rethink products to have either packaging and formulation that were sustainable or regenerative. And I found in that journey that we didn't have just enough technology to accomplish that. We were short of alternatives that were actually superior and giving consumers what they need. I think that the main barrier in some of these cases had been that we never gave consumers what they needed. So when I came into this journey, I found synthetic biology in general the best pathway to produce that, knowing that there was demand in the market and there was consumer appetite.
And obviously you mentioned carbon-13 there. So there's a big element of protecting the Earth's vital systems. How are you utilizing synthetic biology for the good of the environment?
So the technology that we're using is based upon cyanobacteria. Now, a lot of people, I think the most they've ever heard of cyanobacteria is when there's a bloom in a lake somewhere. But fundamentally, it is the most efficient photosynthetic organism on the planet. It's very good at taking in CO2 from the atmosphere, breaking it down. What we're looking to do is to use that process with a little bit of tweaking to take that CO2 and turn it into useful chemicals. So the end product should be at least carbon neutral, quite possibly carbon negative.
And tell me a little bit more about this cyanobacteria, what it does and what can it break down?
In terms of breaking things down, it's primarily CO2. Essentially to live, cyanobacteria needs CO2, water, and light. So it doesn't need feedstocks like sugar, like other microorganisms like yeast or E. coli, for example. So you can put it in a water-based environment. Ours is an ocean-derived strain. It was actually discovered in the harbour in Singapore, I think. You put it in a water-based photobioreactor, pump through CO2 or indeed take CO2 directly from the atmosphere, and it will be secreting useful chemicals into that media. Part of the challenge for us is obviously to make sure we then take those chemicals out of the media. Fortunately, we have some good systems for that.
Are there any downsides to using cyanobacteria? Like, if you're artificially inflating the amount of it in the environment, can it have any negative impact?
Not really, because it won't survive in the wild. But to be doubly sure, we don't let it into the wild. We don't use open ponds, which others do with things like algae, for example, non-genetically modified algae. Ours are closed system photobioreactors, and it's done in a way that keeps it completely separated. But in the worst case scenario, if something fell from space and landed on the photobioreactor and broke it all open, the cyanobacteria would quickly die, wouldn't survive.
Okay. With Deep Blue Biotech, what are you trying to actually achieve with it?
Yeah, so coming at the very beginning, I was explaining that consumers were not getting what they needed. I think there's a first generation of sustainable products that fundamentally failed to consumers. They were more expensive without providing anything else, or just less efficacious. So the promise for them was sustainability was a replacement that was not as good as the past. So what we want to is to flip that narrative. We want to make sustainable products a shortcut for cost effectiveness, superiority, and efficacy. And we know we have the tools, we know we have the technology to accomplish that. And that will create kind of the ripple effects that consumers will identify these as the best alternatives rather than needing to have a conscious to do that. Yeah, we love conscious consumers, but we want all consumers to make the right choice, regardless what other beliefs.
You have this wonderful strap line, and the strap line, if I've got it correctly, is chemicals for the net zero future. So you're trying to manufacture chemicals using cyanobacteria to replace fossil fuel derived chemicals.
Yeah, the best proxy or the best summary would be fossil fuel derived, but broadly we're looking at net zero. So for example, if we are replacing a process that's consuming sugar, therefore affecting deforestation, or that also creates impact. So in general, we want technologies that can balance out the CO2, whether by sinking in it and producing things that are usable. But this will replace fossil fuel derived chemicals and other chemicals that are coming from not as sustainable sources as of today.
What are the first chemicals that you're trying to produce with this process?
From our point of view, the starting point was to look at all of the chemical precursors contained within the cyanobacterial strain with which we're working. It's quite a long list. There's a lot of things it can make. But what we wanted to do as a very first point was to look at, well, what can we make where the market is big and the price point is high? So we decided to start with hyaluronic acid, but it's very popular in personal care, especially skincare. Generally speaking, it costs a lot. And that means we can be competitive pretty much immediately.
And what types of products is it being used in? So you mentioned beauty products and such, but what specifically?
Skincare, moisturizing in particular. The reason hyaluronic acid is so popular is that it's very good at penetrating the skin barrier and it takes moisture with it.
Okay, so let's take hydroloric acid.
Hyaluronic.
Hyaluronic acid. This is an
it is a great
educational
slogan.
journey. Hyaluronic acid. How's it produced? Not through you, but how's it traditionally produced?
Historically, it started as collagen from animal sources. So it was from roster combs. I think that the red bit of it of the roster that was used that was rich in hyaluronic acid. Obviously, that process was not so popular, so they started to do it by fermentation. As Tim was mentioning at the beginning, that consumes a lot of sugar. They use other species to do synthetic biology or biotechnology, but with a high amount of sugar consumption. So I would say today, 60% of production is more fermentation based, 40% is still animal derived, and we're trying to change that.
Okay. And now tell me about your process. How does the technology work? How are you producing this hyaluronic acid? I'll get it right by the end of the show.
It's pretty simple, really. You start with the photobioreactor, which contains water and cyanobacteria. You make sure it has access to light, because you need light for photosynthesis. And then you push CO2 into the photobioreactor. The cyanobacteria takes that CO2, it breaks it down, and it turns into carbon and oxygen and repurposes much of that into the hyaluronic acid, which it secretes into the water in which it's living. We then have a downstream processing system which extracts the hyaluronic acid from that. And hopefully at the end, you're left with something which is very pure and quite valuable.
And as it's a bacteria, it's just naturally reproducing and growing. So it's almost an endless source of, or an endless process that you can run.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to make a biomanufacturing process more efficient, usually these were left behind. The photosynthetic organisms were left behind because they are less productive. Except that we are now working with a highly productive strain, working on the chemicals that they are naturally, very well positioned to produce. So that's kind of an interesting characteristics of why we are doing this and what we're doing in this fashion.
Were there any other types of bacteria that have maybe been utilized in a similar way? And how did you settle on this one? Question.
So, in terms of bacteria in general, E. coli or heterotrophic organisms, they are widely used for the production of many products. If we look at the photosynthetic organisms, not so much cyanobacteria. There have been different strains, but this is probably the first time it's deemed to use at this capacity. But they have used algae, macroalgae, like chlorella or other species, more for food and other uses historically, but not for this kind of task that we have today.
Did I hear correctly that you're feeding in CO2 as well?
Yes.
So you're taking CO2, you're feeding it in, and it's kind of stripping it apart, using the carbon and releasing the oxygen?
Yeah, basically. So the CO2 doesn't exist by the time it's finished. It's been completely turned into something new. And the point, I guess, that the crux of what we're doing is that something new is also something valuable.
Wow. So not only is it replacing a chemical that was fossil fuel derived, but you're also reducing CO2 in the environment. Is it a large quantity that's being reduced? I mean, obviously it depends on how much you're producing, but
we've been working on an LCA. It's the nature of cutting edge technologies. The LCA is a big job. There's a lot of things that you've got to work through, but the initial calculations, purely based upon the hyaluronic acid example, and keep in mind we're going to be doing a lot more than hyaluronic acid, but based upon the hyaluronic acid, for every ton of hyaluronic acid we produce, we will either capture or mitigate around 7.5, 8 tons of CO2.
Wow. That's impressive. And you're producing the chemicals, right? And then the chemicals, how does the business model work, right? So you're then selling them to L'Oreal and the big manufacturers, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, we aim to produce the final, the product that is ready to be integrated in cosmetic formulation. So we are going to be dealing directly. We're actually already in conversations with many of them, but going to be directly dealing with L'Oreal, Unilever, and other cosmetic manufacturers, and also companies that are more up and coming and independent brands that they use contract manufacturers organizations. So they we engage with them to create this capability for them. But the idea is to have the final ingredient delivered to the end user, and then through that, as they notice that this is an ingredient that has the efficacy, the cost effectiveness, and obviously the new story about a marine ingredient coming to the market, that creates an industry pool to the current ingredient manufacturers that they may look into licensing our technology or finding different agreements. Players like Croda, Evonik, Givaudan, etc.
That's incredible. And given though that you're producing you call it the raw materials, are there any regulatory hurdles that you're having to jump through for quality assurance or anything like that?
There is a reason we're going at the personal care sector first. If you go into pharmaceuticals on the one side or you go into food on the other, the regulatory hurdles are quite high. For personal care, we do need to prove the claims. We need to make sure that it's properly certified by the right bodies. But actually, the regulatory hurdles are considerably more surmountable, I think, than in most other sectors.
Are there any special regulations being imposed because the chemicals are produced through synthetic biology as opposed to in the more traditional ways?
Oh no, there's a known pathway. This is the biotechnology pathway for cosmetics has already been created for other ingredients, collagens and some other variants. So they already exist. And it's a known regulatory path. It's not like they have very long lead times. It's very consistent with the 6 to 9 months period that it takes to register ingredients. So it's not very bad.
Let's talk more generally about where the business is at. Walk us through kind of where you're at, how developed the process is, and then we'll go into what happens next.
Yeah, we've been going almost 2 years since we first incorporated while still on the carbon-13 program. Obviously, that's a sort of a competitive process. You go through it, and fortunately, we were one of the companies that was selected for funding. So we took that money and we managed to eke it out to get ourselves to a base level of just enough IP to raise a pre-seed round. So we closed the pre-seed in sort of October, November time last year. So our lead investor is Sustainable Ventures, and they've been hugely supportive. So our lab here in Sheffield is now fully functioning. We've got a team of 3 scientists in the room next door from me at the moment. They are working predominantly on the strain engineering side of things. So as things stand, we've got 5 successfully genetically modified strains, 4 of which contain the hyaluronic acid synthase within the cell, which is what produces the hyaluronic acid, and another one where we've inhibited the production of cellulose, which goes into the cell wall. Because one of the challenges you've got is to get that hyaluronic acid out of the cell into the media. Now, the thing that we're focusing on at the moment is combining all of these different genetic modifications so that we can optimize the yield. The other significant piece of research we're in the early stages of is that scale-up piece. We've got a partner out in Portugal who we're working with to scale the technology up to a 1,000-litre photobioreactor scale. Now, the nature of photobioreactors is that they are modular. So if you can do it at 1,000 litres, you can do it at 1,000,000 litres.
What's the production of a 1,000-litre bioreactor? That's your whole facility, but what output is that of the end product?
It depends a little bit upon what yield we achieve, but the projections suggest a 1,000-litre photobioreactor, which, as I say, is just a test, but that would give us about 1 kilogram of hyaluronic acid a week. So the aim is ultimately to get to the point where we've got 1,000,000-litre photobioreactors.
Per week or per month or year?
That'll be about a week. So you get to the point where each one is turning out maybe a ton of hyaluronic acid per week. And it scales up because hyaluronic acid is expensive. It's typically north of $2,000 per kilogram.
Oh, wow.
You can see how it starts to generate some fairly significant revenues.
And as you said, it's modular, so you just add another 1,000, another 1,000, another 1,000, and keep it going from there.
Yeah,
It's incredible.
exactly. We went out to Portugal just before Christmas, and we saw one of the photobioreactors that our partners have got, and it's essentially a field of tubes filled with water. It's quite an impressive facility.
Very cool. So what are the next steps to getting that 1,000-liter bioreactor up and running?
There's a couple of things that needs to happen. First, we need to validate the process. So we need to have the strain that is producing hyaluronic acid in the way we want, which is high yield, but also secreting that into the media. Just for you to have as a reference, the majority of the chemicals we have, 80% of the cost of a chemical is the downstream process. So if we get the material to be outside of the cell, it's a much simpler process. That's one of the drivers of our cost efficiency. So once we get into that stage, we can start scaling it up. And then we keep improving the yields of the cell through different strategies that we have already identified to get to ideally 1 gram per liter, which is our goal. And from there, it's just, keep enhancing the process. And then after that, we move into other chemicals.
What are some of those other chemicals that you've got in mind?
Essentially, we've started towards the higher end of things, but there are more expensive chemicals that we can make. Believe it or not, there are some which cost tens of thousands per kilogram, but the markets are small. But also, as you work down the value chain, we can get towards things like peptides, carotenoids. Ultimately, we want to get down to biofuels. So we're looking at things like butanol, for example, where the environmental impact would be absolutely enormous.
That's amazing. What you're talking about right now is the production of chemicals, and you're eating CO2. But
so this strain is very good at capturing CO2, period. These organisms are very flexible, and you can tell them to do a lot of stuff, but every pathway, as you rightly mentioned, has different unit economics. And in some cases, it makes a lot of sense. And in some cases, it's very hard to make a sustainable business for the long term.
What have been the biggest challenges that you faced along the way?
I would say money. We've always had a pretty solid plan of what we wanted to do. We knew what we needed to do to get it done, but the funding environment now is very different to how it was just a few years ago. Money's much tighter. It's one of the reasons why we went for hyaluronic acid first, because you need to show that you can generate profits quickly, because only then I think will investors have the faith to follow you.
What about grants, though? I mean, surely you're doing something that's reducing CO2 emissions. It's incredibly innovative, and you're producing a high worth good. What kind of government support have you been able?
We've won 2 Innovate UK grants and a 3rd grant from an organisation called Para. But for the Innovate UK grants, it's not 100% funded. We actually won one of the grants before we'd completed our pre-seed round. And so there was a bit of a chicken and egg. Fortunately, we closed the round in time to be able to capitalise upon it. But there is sometimes a slight challenge there.
Yeah, you raise a very fair point, because this is a business model and a tech space that doesn't work without government support. It's not the typical venture-backed business where you have, you get to a stage where you are already creating revenue, and it's very easy to predict the shape of the business and therefore the returns. Here you are making some bets. So I think that is the kind of characteristics that deep tech in general has. And when money, because of interest rates and the current ecosystem, is very expensive, they go for the safer bets.
Let's say that the next 5 years go by and things are a success. What does that success look like for you in the business?
I think we want, our primary driver has always been climate change, mitigation, prevention, whatever you want to call it. But we need to build a profitable company. I think without the other, probably I wouldn't count as success. within the next 5 years, I think we can achieve both, and we can achieve significant impact on the environment, and I think we can make sizable profits.
Yeah, I would say the fact that we have created a clear perception in consumers' minds and companies that sustainable technologies is a pathway of superiority and therefore for growth for them. So if they want to win in the marketplace, these are the best technologies they can use. That's the major win I would add to the ones that Tim described, because that means the enabling ecosystem around us will pour money into it because they know this is the pathway that is going to be pursued in the next few years.
So great products, reduce climate change, make money. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I think that sums it up nicely.
I definitely think you're on the way to getting there. It's been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, I've learned a lot on this episode. For those that want to find out more about what you're doing, where should they go? What should they do?
So we have our website, bluebiotech.com. They can find some of the information there. Obviously, you can find us in LinkedIn, and obviously in our profiles team and myself. You can always reach out to us, and you'll find out more. But we keep our social media and our website quite updated with the latest things. And obviously, we are always engaging with like-minded people and people in this journey.
I'm going to challenge you with something. So when do we think the first product will be made with your acid in it?
We've spoken to some of the personal care manufacturers about the timelines. I think 2027 is feasible. Slightly wary of saying definitely, but that sort of timeline looks doable from our point of view.
Excellent. So I'm going to be following the website, of course, and then come 2027, we're going to have another episode. You're going to be on. You're going to tell me about that first product that's got your solutions in it. Gents, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will definitely speak, if not in 2027, before then.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you for having us.
Well, that's it for this episode of Angel Insights. We do hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did, please like or subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode. And if you want to learn more about Syndicate Room, please head on over to www.syndicateroom.com. We'll see you next time. Bye.